we like to thank all the witnesses today. Competitiveness in Canada is a very broad subject, and you've each brought your own perspective to the issue. I would like to focus in on the Competition Act itself. So, first of all, I'd like to ask Monsieur Vaillancourt about some of his testimony in relation to one section of the Act, the abuse of dominance provision. And just so you know, Monsieur Vaillancourt, we've heard many opinions related to the Competition Act. Another area is the efficiencies defense. Some people feeling that that should be very much modified, if not done away with. I guess that I sort of have a fundamental question. Is it time for the federal government to conduct or commission an in-depth review of the Act as a whole?
Yes, thank you for the question. I think that's a fair question, and likely it could do with a wholesale revision and reviews. There have been a few times where there have been large amendments, 1986 being one, and 2009 being another, although at a smaller scale. So, particularly with issues around digital economy and I think that some of the amendments that were made initially uh, were made, and now that we have the track record to see how it's panned out, particularly this private access to the tribunal, initially a limited right was granted. The reason it wasn't more broad and including abuse of dominance is there was this floodgates concern, which really hasn't borne out at all over the last 20 years or so. So I agree that it would make sense to give a more in-depth review to the Act.
Thank you. And in respect to the number of complaints that are actually investigated, you pointed to the fact that there were just a very small proportion. Would you say that the lack of investigation is because of a lack of resources, or is there something particular within the Competition Bureau's mandate that does not allow them to pursue the complaints? Um, is it more one than the other, or could you elaborate? Because you did talk about a lack of resources.
Yeah, so I mean, I have the perspective of a private practitioner where we do hear reports from the Bureau on things such as these statistics. Ultimately, we're not in the decision-making room where priorities are set. The Bureau does have enforcement priorities that they publish every year. From my observations, it seems that if you have a matter that falls outside one of those priority areas, it's more difficult to get the interest of the Bureau. I think ultimately it does come down to a question of resources. Certainly of the 467 complaints, I doubt that all of them were worthy of carrying forward to the next level, but surely more than the Bureau was able to take a look at with its limitations in its budget. When it has other parts of its mandate, such as criminal enforcement and the mandatory merger review, where those are more fixed costs. And I think that where there's some squishiness and money has to get cut, my perception is that is more on the this type of stuff, the reviewable matters.
Thank you. In respect to the Competition Tribunal, we, as committee members, did receive a brief through the clerk from a former member of the Competition Tribunal. And he was very much of the opinion that it seems to have become a rubber stamp. And he also felt that the tribunal should be able to hear consent agreement cases. Do you have an opinion on that?
Well, I think as far as, I think that just as in a criminal matter where a judge in sentencing retains discretion, perhaps some residual discretion to the tribunal may be warranted. But the settlements that are negotiated tend to be very complex and based on a lot of very complicated factors. And so, I think that there is a risk that that it's sort of like a Jenga tower, where if the tribunal wants to pull out one piece because they don't like that, then it can have an unintended consequence of blowing the whole thing. So I'm not incredibly passionate about that recommendation.
Thank you. Mr. Datchis, you did have your hand up. I see it's up on and off. Did you want to get in on the conversation on the Competition Act?
Yes, very much so. The reason being is that the CDH Institute has a competition policy council, and this is comprised of top-ranked academics and practitioners active in the field of competition policy. And I wanted to point the committee to that group's work. It hits on a number of these points that you've asked about and that Dave has raised. Two I'll just mention. One being on private remedies in the Competition Act. The group did endorse that request, and on the need for the Bureau to have more resources. So there's lots that you can use from that group.
Thank you very much. And do I have any more time, Madam Chair?
10 seconds.
Anything, Professor Larkin, that you would like to add on the Competition Act? I saw you nod at one point.
Yeah, thank you so much. I agree with a lot of the things that have been said here. This idea of looking at gaining efficiency on one side, and it's something that needs to be looked more into because it's a vague issue. It's hard to interpret, and it's not clear who those benefits efficiency apply to.
Thank you very much.
Thank